In the winter of 1970, Neil Armstrong walked into a room and felt something he had not felt since he was a child. Not since he had stood at the edge of something so vast and so incomprehensible that his brain simply refused to process the scale of it. He had felt that standing on the surface of the moon, 239,000 miles from Earth. Nothing above him but the universe. He felt it again that night, standing in a gymnasium in Los Angeles, watching a man who weighed 135 pounds. Armstrong would tell one person what happened in that room. He made them promise never to repeat it while he was alive. Neil Armstrong died in 2012. This is that story. To understand why this meeting happened at all, you need to understand what Neil Armstrong's life looked like in the 6 months after he returned from the moon. Most people imagine that coming back from the moon would feel like a triumph, like the greatest high a human being could experience, like the rest of your life would be lit up by what you had done. It was not like that. Armstrong came back from the moon and found himself in a world that no longer quite made sense. He had been somewhere no human being had ever been. He had looked back at the Earth from a distance so enormous that the entire planet, every person, every mountain, every ocean, every war and every love story that had ever happened, fit inside his thumb. He had walked on another world. And then he had come back. And people wanted him to give speeches, shake hands, smile for photographs, cut ribbons at shopping malls. He did it. He was a disciplined man, a military man. He understood duty. But something inside him had changed in a way that he could not explain to anyone, because no one else had ever been where he had been. He began quietly to search, not for fame. He already had more of that than he wanted. Not for achievement. He had achieved the single greatest thing a human being had achieved in the history of the species. He was searching for something he could not name yet. Something he had felt for those brief hours on the surface of the moon and had not felt since he came back. The feeling of being completely, totally present in a moment so far beyond ordinary experience that the thinking mind simply stops its noise and something deeper takes over. He did not know that what he was searching for had a name in another tradition entirely. He did not know that a 29-year-old man in Los Angeles had spent his entire life chasing the exact same feeling. Through a completely different door. The connection happened through a mutual acquaintance. A man who moved in the overlap between the scientific world and the entertainment world. The kind of person who exists in every era in Los Angeles. The connector, the one who knows everyone and sees the threads between people that others miss. He had met Armstrong at a function. He had trained briefly with Bruce Lee the previous year. And one afternoon, talking to Armstrong about the astronaut's strange post-moon restlessness, he said something almost offhand. He said, "There is a man I think you should meet. Not a scientist. Not a philosopher. A martial artist." Armstrong's first reaction was polite skepticism. He was a test pilot, an engineer, a man of equations and data and physical systems. Martial arts was not part of his world. But the acquaintance said something that stopped him. He said, "This man has found a way to get his mind completely out of the way of his body. To act without the interference of thought. To be so present in a single moment that time itself seems to change around him." Armstrong was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, Now, before I tell you what happened when they met, I need you to understand something about Bruce Lee in early 1970 that almost nobody talks about. By early 1970, Bruce Lee was in crisis. Not a public crisis. Not the kind that ends up in newspapers. Private one. Physical. Devastating. In February of 1970, Bruce Lee was doing a training exercise, a good morning exercise with a heavily loaded barbell, when something in his lower back gave way. The injury was severe. The fourth sacral nerve was damaged. Doctors told him he might never be able to kick again. Think about what that means for a moment. Bruce Lee's kick was not just a technique. It was the physical expression of everything he believed about the human body. About speed and precision and the perfect transfer of energy from the ground through the legs, through the hips and out into the world. He had been perfecting it since he was 13 years old. And now doctors were telling him it might be gone. He was put on bed rest. Complete bed rest. For weeks that stretched into months. For a man who trained every single day, who felt physically ill when he could not train, this was its own kind of hell. But here is what Bruce Lee did during those months on his back. He wrote. He filled notebook after notebook with his philosophy. His ideas about martial arts, about the human body, about consciousness, about the nature of combat and the nature of existence. He drew diagrams. He worked through concepts that he had been too busy training to articulate. He called this period the most important of his life. Not because of the injury, because of what the stillness forced him to see. By the time he was back on his feet, by the time he had defied every medical prediction and returned to full training, he had become something different. Not just a martial artist, a philosopher of the body, a man who understood not just how to move, but why movement matters, what it reveals, what it connects us to. That is the man Neil Armstrong met in the gymnasium in Los Angeles. If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. The gymnasium was empty except for the three of them. Armstrong, the acquaintance, and Bruce Lee. Armstrong arrived expecting something impressive. A demonstration. Controlled. Technical. The kind of thing you appreciate intellectually the way you appreciate a well-designed machine. Bruce Lee shook his hand. Armstrong would describe this moment later. He said that the handshake was completely ordinary. Firm. Warm. Nothing unusual. And yet, he said something in his brain registered something it could not name. Like a piece of equipment detecting a signal it was not calibrated to identify. Not a threat. Not anything he could point to. Just a signal that said, "Pay attention. This is different." Bruce Lee asked Armstrong a question before anything else. He said, "What did it feel like? The moment just before you stepped onto the surface. Not after. Not the famous first step with the words that the whole world heard. Before. The moment just before, when your foot was still in the air, when the step had not yet happened but was absolutely going to happen, and there was nothing in the universe except that single point of transition." Armstrong looked at him for a long time. Nobody had ever asked him that question. In all the interviews, all the speeches, all the hands shaken and ribbons cut and microphones pointed at his face, nobody had ever asked about the before. He said, "It felt like the only moment that has ever existed." Bruce Lee nodded once. He said, "Yes, that is it." And then he began to move. What happened in that gymnasium over the next 2 hours has no complete record. The acquaintance who was present has described pieces of it. Fragments. Impressions. He said Bruce Lee demonstrated things that, standing in a gymnasium in Los Angeles watching them happen in real life, should not have been physically possible. Not tricks. Not illusions. Physical realities that contradicted what the watching mind insisted it knew about the human body. Speed that registered not as speed but as the simple absence of the interval that should have existed between one position and another. Force that came from nowhere visible. No windup. No properastion. A stillness and then an impact and nothing between them that the eye could follow. And throughout all of it, this is the detail the acquaintance kept returning to: Bruce Lee's face. Completely calm. No effort visible anywhere. No strain. No concentration in the way that concentration usually shows itself on a face. Just presence. Pure, complete, undivided presence in the moment. The acquaintance said he watched Neil Armstrong watching this. And he said he saw something happen on Armstrong's face that he had seen photographs of before. The same expression Armstrong wore in the photographs taken on the surface of the moon. Not wonder exactly. Not awe exactly. The expression of a person who has just encountered the edge of what the human mind can contain, and has chosen, instead of retreating, to step forward. They talked afterward for a long time. Sitting on the floor of the gymnasium, the three of them. No cameras. No audience. No performance of any kind. Armstrong asked questions the way engineers ask questions. Precise, specific, pulling at the edges of what he had just witnessed, trying to find the structural logic underneath it. Bruce Lee answered the way he always answered, directly, without mysticism, without the kind of false profundity that martial arts teachers sometimes hide behind. he said. The body already knows everything it needs to know. The only problem is the mind. The mind is always late, always adding commentary to something that has already happened. The goal is to shorten the distance between event and response until there is no distance at all. Armstrong was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that stopped the conversation entirely. He said, "That is exactly what happens in the spacecraft during re-entry. The calculations are already done before you are aware of doing them. The hands move before the decision is made. If you think about it, you are already behind." Bruce Lee looked at him for a long time, and then he smiled. Not a polite smile, a genuine one. The kind that comes when someone says something you have been trying to say for years and finally someone else has found the words. He said, "Yes, exactly that. Two men from completely different worlds. One who had been to the moon and back. One who had never left Los Angeles except to follow a dream that America kept telling him wasn't his to have. And in a gymnasium on a winter evening in 1970, they discovered they had been studying the same thing from opposite sides of the universe." If you love Bruce Lee stories, subscribe. I post rare stories every day. Here is what hits hardest about this story. Neil Armstrong was the most celebrated human being on the planet in 1970. He had done the thing that humanity had dreamed of doing since the first person looked up at the sky and wondered. Every door in the world was open to him. Every room was ready to give him its best seat. And the one person who made him feel small, genuinely, authentically small in the best possible way, was a man that Hollywood had spent 6 years trying to keep out of the story. A man who had been told, repeatedly and explicitly, that America was not ready for someone like him. A man who had no Academy Award, no NASA patch on his shoulder, no national monument with his name on it, just a body he had built into something the human mind could barely process. And a philosophy he had earned not in a classroom but on the floor of a gymnasium at 4 in the morning, year after year after year. Armstrong told one person about that evening. He said, "I have stood on the moon. I have seen the earth from a distance that makes everything on it look the size of a marble. And I have never felt the way I felt watching that man move." He said, "It was the only time in my life, outside of space, that I understood what it means to be completely free." Bruce Lee died 3 years later. He never knew that the first man to walk on the moon had gone home that night and lain awake for hours thinking about what he had seen. He just trained, the way he always trained. Because for Bruce Lee, the training was never about being seen. It was about becoming something that could not be contained by anyone else's idea of what was possible. That is the thing nobody ever fully understood about him. Not Hollywood. Not the critics. Not even the people who loved him most. He was not trying to impress the world. He was trying to find the edge of himself. And every time he found it, he stepped forward.